The wind howled through the dark streets as Luca Savelli, a successful businessman, navigated his sleek car through the relentless rain. He leaned back in his seat, his eyes fixed on the road, though his mind was far from the endless city lights outside. Instead, his thoughts were consumed by the silent suffering of his son, Leonardo. The boy had been tormented by his mother's sudden passing, his soul burdened with an unshakable anxiety that left him paralyzed by fear. Luca had tried everything to help him, from the finest therapist to the most expensive treatments, but nothing seemed to ease his son's suffering. Every day, every moment spent watching Leonardo struggle, weighed heavily on Luca's heart. Tonight, as the rain intensified, Luca felt a deep sense of helplessness. He wasn't sure how much longer he could bear to see his son in this state. The car glided past the wet streets of the city, its tires screeching slightly against the slick asphalt. Marco, his longtime driver, was focused on the road when suddenly he slammed on the brakes, bringing the car to an abrupt stop. Luca sat up, looking ahead through the windshield. In the dim glow of the headlights, he saw a figure standing in the middle of the street, drenched in the rain, a woman with a child in her arms. The child was crying loudly, their small frame trembling against the cold. Without thinking, Luca ordered Marco to pull over. His heart raced as he looked at the scene before him. There was something about this woman, something that struck him deeply. "Get out and help them," Luca said, his voice low but urgent. Marco hesitated, then nodded. As Luca stepped out into the storm, the cold rain immediately soaked through his clothes. He walked toward the woman and child, his mind racing with questions. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice cutting through the roar of the rain. The woman looked up, startled. Her eyes, wide and fearful, met his. She shivered but managed to whisper, I found him. I don't know where to take him. He's been abandoned alone." The child, a boy no older than 4 or 5, clung tightly to her, his cries filled with fear. Luca's heart sank. "Come with me," he said softly, offering her his hand. "I'll take you somewhere warm. We can figure it out there." The woman, whose name was Elena, seemed hesitant at first, glancing down at the child. She had no other choice. With a shaky breath, she nodded and took his hand, still unsure of the stranger's motives but too desperate to refuse. The three of them walked toward the car, the rain continuing to pour down, masking the emotions swirling in their hearts. Elena's body trembled as she slid into the car, the warmth of the interior a stark contrast to the cold, damp night outside. She wrapped her arms around the child, Alfredo, who had calmed down but still clung to her. Lucas sat across from them, his gaze focused on the road, but his thoughts were far from the traffic ahead. He was trying to understand what had led Elena to this moment, but the storm outside mirrored the confusion he felt inside. As the car moved through the wet streets, Elena wiped the tears from her face, her voice quiet as she spoke. "I found him in an alley, cold and abandoned. I don't know how long he'd been there. I tried to get help, but no one was around. I just couldn't leave him there." Luca's heart clenched. He could hear the exhaustion in her voice, the deep weariness of someone who had been through far too much. He couldn't ignore the pang of sympathy that shot through him. "Where are you from? What happened to you?" Elena hesitated, her eyes darting to the boy in her arms before looking back at Luca. I'm trying to get by. I have a brother, Gabriel. I need to find him, but I don't know where to start. I've been moving from place to place, trying to survive." Her words were fragmented, as if she wasn't sure whether to share more or keep her past hidden. Lucas studied her in silence, sensing there was more to her story, but something about her seemed genuine. He couldn't explain why, but he felt drawn to help. "You don't have to explain anything to me, but you can stay with us for a while. We can figure things out." Elena looked at him in disbelief, her eyes searching his face for any sign of deception. She had learned not to trust strangers, not in the world she had come from. But there was something in Luca's eyes, something warm, something kind, that made her take a leap of faith. "Why would you help us?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Luca sighed, his mind still on his son. "My son is sick. He's been struggling with fear and anxiety since his mother passed away. I think you might be able to help him. You have a calming presence. Maybe you could stay with us for a little while and see if you can help him." The words hung in the air, and Elena didn't know what to say. Her instinct was to refuse, to tell him she wasn't the right person for this. But the truth was that she had no other options. The possibility of a safe place, even if temporary, was something she couldn't pass up. "Okay," she said finally, her voice soft but resolute. "I'll help. For now." Luca nodded, relieved by her agreement. He gave a quick glance at Alfredo, whose eyes were closed, exhaustion finally taking over. They drove in silence, the tension between them slowly easing as they moved closer to Luca's mansion. Elena was no longer just a stranger in the storm. She had become someone important, someone who could possibly change everything for his family. As the mansion loomed ahead, its lights shining warmly in the distance, Luca felt a strange sense of hope. Perhaps this unexpected encounter would bring the peace his family so desperately needed. Luca's mansion stood like a fortress against the stormy night, its grand architecture illuminated by the soft glow of exterior lights. As the car pulled up the long driveway, Elena's eyes widened at the sight of the sprawling estate. She had never seen anything like it. A massive, elegant building surrounded by lush gardens, its stone walls exuding a sense of both power and isolation. It felt like a world far removed from the alleyway she had grown up in, a place where people like her rarely ventured. When the car came to a stop, Marco opened the door, and Lucas stepped out first, followed by Elena and Alfredo. The chill in the air was nothing compared to the icy reception they were about to receive inside. As they entered the mansion, Elena was immediately struck by its size. The high ceilings and grand marble floors were bathed in soft light from the crystal chandeliers. But despite the grandeur, the atmosphere was heavy, almost suffocating. Before Luca could guide them further into the house, Adriana, his fiancée, appeared in the foyer. Her perfect smile faltered as her gaze landed on Elena, a stranger in the midst of their carefully curated world. Her eyes narrowed ever so slightly, a flicker of judgment passing through them. "Who is this?" Adriana asked, her tone colder than the room around them. She didn't wait for Luca's response before continuing. "You bring a woman and a child in out of nowhere, and we're supposed to just accept it?" Luca's jaw tightened, but he stood firm. "Elena found the boy on the streets, Adriana. She's helping him. They'll be staying here for a while." The tension in the air was palpable. Adriana's gaze didn't soften, and Elena, sensing the hostility, felt her stomach twist. She had never been one to enjoy drawing attention, especially negative attention, but the scrutiny from Adriana made her feel as though she didn't belong. "Fine," Adriana said, her voice cool, though her eyes continued to scrutinize Elena. "But remember, this is our home, Luca." Luca's expression softened with a hint of annoyance. "It's also my son's home," he reminded her. Adriana's lips tightened, and with a quick glance at the child in Elena's arms, she turned on her heel, leaving the two of them to move deeper into the house. The doors of the mansion closed behind them, sealing off the storm outside, but Elena felt no warmth inside. As the night went on, Elena stayed close to Alfredo, who had fallen into a quiet, uneasy sleep on the couch in the living room. Luca, his mind still preoccupied with his son, retreated to his study, leaving her alone with her thoughts. It wasn't long before the staff began to make their presence felt. Marina, the housekeeper, eyed Elena with a sharpness that spoke volumes. There was no warmth in her gaze, just the cool, calculated distance of someone who had no patience for change. Elena tried not to mind. She was used to feeling like an outsider, used to the judgment that came with her circumstances. What mattered now was Leonardo. She had promised Luca that she would help his son, and she was determined to do so, no matter the cold stares or whispered comments. That night, as she sat by the fire, Alfredo resting beside her, Elena's thoughts turned inward. She couldn't shake the feeling that her presence in this mansion, this world of wealth and privilege, wasn't entirely welcome. But she had a job to do. She couldn't afford to falter now, not when she had the chance to make a difference in someone's life. The days that followed passed in a blur. Elena spent her time caring for Alfredo, who seemed to grow more attached to her with every passing hour. She took him under her wing, making sure he ate well and slept soundly. But it was Leonardo who occupied her thoughts. Every moment with him felt like a fragile balance, a delicate dance between helping him while remaining a stranger in this vast, unfamiliar house. Despite her best efforts to stay focused on her role as a caretaker, the cold atmosphere in the mansion was hard to ignore. Marina's disdain was palpable, her every glance and comment dripping with thinly veiled contempt. The other staff members were no different. Elena's presence seemed to unsettle them, as if her very existence threatened the carefully maintained order of the Savelli household. Yet, Elena did her best to rise above it all. She focused on Leonardo, who was still struggling with the fear and anxiety that gripped him. Every evening, she would sit with him, talking softly, offering reassurance. Slowly, over the course of several days, Luca began to notice a change. Leonardo, who had been a shell of a boy, seemed to relax under Elena's care. His once tense shoulders would drop as he listened to her soothing voice, and at night, his sleep seemed less troubled, less restless. One evening, as she sat beside Leonardo's bed, reading him a story, Luca watched from the doorway. His heart clenched as he saw the small but significant change in his son. For the first time in years, Leonardo appeared calm, his fear at bay, if only for a little while. After the story ended, Lucas stepped into the room, his eyes searching Elena's face. "Thank you," he said softly, his voice filled with quiet gratitude. "I don't know how you're doing it, but you're helping him. He's been better these past few days." Elena offered him a small smile, though her own heart was heavy. The tension in the house had not gone unnoticed by her. Despite the improvement in Leonardo's condition, the walls between her and the rest of the household were only growing higher. Adriana's coldness had not abated, and the staff remained aloof. "I'm just doing my best," Elena said, her voice steady but tinged with sadness. "But there's still so much to be done." Luca nodded. He could sense that Elena was hiding something deeper than the rough exterior she wore. He didn't press her, not yet, but he had learned not to trust easily, and his suspicion began to take root. There was more to Elena than she was letting on. As the night wore on, Elena sat in the dim light of the room, watching over Alfredo as he slept. The house was silent, but the weight of uncertainty pressed heavily on her chest. She had come to help, but the more she became a part of this world, the more she felt the cracks in the surface, the hidden truths waiting to be uncovered. The mansion, with all its luxury, could not hide the fragility beneath. And as much as she tried to hold everything together, Elena knew the storm was far from over. The days seemed to stretch endlessly, and the atmosphere in the mansion grew even more tense. While Leonardo's condition continued to improve under Elena's care, the friction within the household only deepened. Adriana's icy reception had never thawed, and the staff's cold indifference was becoming increasingly unbearable. Elena kept her head down, focusing on Alfredo and Leonardo, doing her best to stay out of the way and maintain a semblance of peace in the mansion. But every day, it became more difficult to ignore the whispers, the subtle glances, and the growing tension that surrounded her. It was one afternoon, as Elena was making her way through the grand hallway, that she overheard a conversation that would set the course of everything to come. She paused just outside the dining room, where Adriana and Marina were talking in low, urgent tones. From the fragments of their words, Elena could hear the unmistakable thread of suspicion that ran through their conversation. "He's completely blind to it." Adriana's voice was laced with frustration. "She's nothing but a liar, a street rat. Luca has no idea what he's inviting into his home." Marina's voice followed, softer but sharp with disdain. "I've heard things, Adriana, things that make me believe she's not telling the truth. That woman, she's hiding something. And that child she brought with her? He doesn't even look like her. What if she's using him as a cover?" Elena's breath hitched as she stood frozen, unable to move. She felt a cold, knot twist in her stomach. She knew from the start that she would be an outsider in this world. But hearing this confirmation, hearing the venom in their voices, made her heart sink. They had already made up their minds about her. But she wasn't about to let their suspicions dictate her life here. Before she could process everything, she heard footsteps approaching. In a panic, Elena quickly stepped back into a small alcove, out of sight, her heart pounding in her chest. She held her breath as Marina and Adriana walked past, their conversation continuing, though they were now too far for her to hear. The air felt thick with hostility, and Elena couldn't shake the feeling that her every move was being watched. She wasn't naive. She knew that the tension had been growing for days, but now she understood the true extent of it. Adriana, once cold, had now begun to suspect her of something far darker. And Marina, the housekeeper, was all too eager to play her part in casting doubt on Elena's presence in the mansion. As Elena quietly made her way back to the main part of the house, she knew she had to be careful. She couldn't let her guard down, not when everything she was working for was on the line. Luca, though kind, was starting to distance himself from her, his trust slowly eroding. She could feel it in the way his gaze lingered on her, the subtle questions in his eyes. It was only a matter of time before the truth she was hiding would come to light. Luca's mind had been preoccupied with Elena for days. His suspicion, which had slowly been building ever since she entered his home, now felt like an insistent pull in his gut. He couldn't ignore it any longer. There was something about her that didn't add up. She had a way with Leonardo. Yes, a calming presence that seemed to reach into his son's soul and bring him peace. But that alone wasn't enough to explain the strange sense of discomfort that had taken root in Luca's mind. It wasn't just the whispers from Adriana and Marina that troubled him. It was his own growing uncertainty. He had promised to protect his son at all costs. And if there was even the slightest chance that Elena wasn't who she claimed to be, he needed to know. He couldn't afford to let his guard down again. Not after everything that had happened with his late wife. That night, Luca decided to take matters into his own hands. After ensuring that Elena had tucked Leonardo into bed and Alfredo had fallen asleep, he slipped quietly into Leonardo's room. The mansion was eerily quiet, the sound of the storm outside muffled against the thick walls. He moved quickly, setting up a discreet baby monitor in the corner of the room, hidden from view but positioned to capture every movement. As he made sure everything was in place, a wave of unease washed over him. This was not who he was. He wasn't the kind of person who spied on others, but something about Elena was off. She had managed to worm her way into his life, into his son's life, with such ease that it made Luca uneasy. Was she truly helping Leonardo, or was there something more sinister at play? Luca stood in the doorway, his eyes lingering on Leonardo's peaceful face as he slept. The boy had improved, no doubt, but the questions in Luca's mind continued to swirl. He needed answers. He needed to know who Elena really was. The next few days were spent in a strange mixture of hope and dread. Luca would spend hours in his study, watching the footage from the monitor. At first, it seemed harmless. Elena, with Alfredo in tow, would enter Leonardo's room and sit by the boy's side, talking to him in a soft, soothing voice. There were no signs of anything suspicious. Yet, each time Luca watched, something felt wrong. It wasn't just the footage, it was the way he was looking at her. He wasn't just watching her actions anymore. He was scrutinizing her every gesture, every glance, as though searching for something hidden beneath her calm exterior. Was she genuinely trying to help, or was there something more to this woman than met the eye? Luca had no clear answers, but the longer he watched, the more questions piled up. He couldn't shake the feeling that Elena was playing a role, and he couldn't afford to let his guard down, not when his son's safety was at risk. As the days turned into weeks, the unease in Luca's heart only grew. What was Elena's past? Who was she really? And why did his son trust her so completely? But as the mystery deepened, so did Luca's sense of isolation. The more he tried to uncover the truth, the more it felt as though everyone around him was hiding something. Luca's obsession with discovering the truth about Elena had consumed him. The hidden camera footage had given him no concrete answers, but his unease remained. It was a deep-seated feeling that he couldn't shake off, like an itch that could never quite be scratched. Every time he saw her with Leonardo, his son so calm in her presence, doubts gnawed at him. Could a woman with a past like hers, someone who had lived on the streets, really be trusted? Was there something in Elena's history that made her too dangerous to be in their home? Then came the moment that changed everything. It happened one evening as Luca was making his way down the hall, the flickering lights from the storm outside casting shadows across the mansion. He heard voices from the servants' quarters, hushed, urgent, voices that spoke in a tone that made his heart rate pick up. He was too far to make out the words, but the feeling was unmistakable. Something was being discussed, something he wasn't supposed to hear. Luca moved closer, instinctively. The door to the servants' quarters was cracked open, and as he leaned in, the voices became clearer. It was Adriana, talking to Marina, her voice low, but cutting through the silence. He's too trusting, Marina. Don't you see it? She's not who she says she is. She's hiding something, and I'm not going to let her destroy this family. Luca's breath caught in his throat. He knew the conversation wasn't about him. It was about Elena. His grip tightened on the doorknob as he pressed his ear against the wood, trying to hear every word. Marina's voice, colder than ice, followed. I've been watching her, Adriana. She's too smooth, too perfect in front of him. But there are things that don't add up. She's using that boy, Alfredo, as a shield. She came here for a reason, and I'm sure it's not to help Leonardo. Luca's pulse quickened as the words hit him like a punch. Using Alfredo as a shield? What did that mean? And why did they suspect Elena so much? His mind raced, trying to make sense of what he had just overheard. But before he could react, the door creaked, and he quickly stepped back into the shadows, out of sight. As the voices faded away, he turned and hurried back down the hall, his mind in turmoil. The pieces were starting to fall into place. He had always suspected that Elena was hiding something, but hearing these whispers confirmed it. She was playing a game, and Luca wasn't sure he was part of the plan. But what could her motive be? Why would she come into their lives, helping his son, only to hide something from him? The next day, he decided to confront her. No more secrets, no more waiting. He needed answers, and he wasn't going to stop until he got them. Elena could feel the shift in the air, the weight of Luca's gaze, the subtle tension that had begun to fester between them was impossible to ignore. She knew he was suspicious, knew that he was beginning to see through her calm exterior. His questions, though never spoken outright, were becoming more frequent, his eyes searching hers as if trying to peel away the layers of her carefully constructed facade. That evening, after dinner, as the storm outside intensified, Luca requested a private conversation with her. Elena's heart began to race. She had been dreading this moment. She had known it was coming. There was no way Luca could continue to trust her without knowing the truth. But the truth, once revealed, might destroy everything. She found Luca waiting in his study, a glass of scotch in hand. The fire crackled softly in the background, casting a warm glow over the room. But the warmth was the only thing that felt comforting. The look in Luca's eyes told her everything she needed to know. He had found something. He had uncovered her secret. Sit down, Elena, Luca said, his voice calm but firm. We need to talk. Elena swallowed, her throat dry. She lowered herself into the chair across from him, eyes cast downward. She could feel the pressure building in her chest, the weight of everything she had kept hidden threatening to crush her. Luca studied her for a long moment before speaking again. I've been watching you, Elena. I know something is off, and I think it's time you tell me the truth. His gaze was unrelenting, and his voice left no room for evasion. Elena's mind spun, but she forced herself to speak. She couldn't run anymore. What do you want to know? She asked softly, her voice barely above a whisper. Luca placed a glass of scotch on the table in front of him. I know you're not who you claim to be. You came here with Alfredo. Who is he really? And why are you hiding him? Elena closed her eyes, taking a deep breath. She had feared this moment, but she knew it was inevitable. It was time to face the truth. That boy, Alfredo, Elena began, her voice shaking slightly. He's not just a boy I found on the street. He's my brother's son. Gabriel is his father. Luca's eyes narrowed. Gabriel? Your brother? Elena nodded, her hands trembling in her lap. Yes. Gabriel was the only family I had left after my parents died. But after I lost track of him, everything changed. I went looking for him, but I couldn't find him. I was desperate, trying to make sense of everything, and I found Alfredo. He was abandoned, just like I was. So I took him in. He's the only family I have now." Luca listened carefully, his eyes softening as he heard the pain in Elena's voice. "Why didn't you tell me this before?" "I didn't know how," Elena admitted, her voice breaking. "I didn't want you to think I was using you or lying to you. I only came here to help. I wanted to help your son, and I didn't want my past to get in the way." Luca sat back, taking in her words. The pieces were starting to fit together. Elena wasn't just a stray, a random person who had wandered into their lives. She had a history, one that was filled with pain and loss, just like his own. And yet, something still didn't sit right with him. Why had she been so secretive? What was she really hiding? He reached across the table, placing a hand gently on hers. "Elena, I want to believe you, but you've been so careful with the truth. I need to know everything, not just pieces." Elena looked up at him, her eyes filled with a mixture of fear and determination. "I will tell you everything, Luca, but first I need your help. I have to find Gabriel. I can't do this alone." The request hung in the air between them, heavy with the weight of the truth and the uncertainty of what the future held. Luca's mind raced as he considered her words. If what Elena said was true, it changed everything. There was more to her than he had ever imagined, and the past she had been running from was far darker than he could have known. But it was clear she wasn't the person everyone thought she was. And for better or worse, her story was now tied to his. The path forward was uncertain, but one thing was clear. Elena's past had come to light. And with it, a new chapter in their lives was about to begin. The decision to travel to Gabriel's last known whereabouts came swiftly after Elena's confession. Luca had listened carefully, weighing each word, but something in his heart told him that helping her was the right thing to do. Despite his lingering doubts about her past, he couldn't deny the deep sense of responsibility he felt for Elena, especially after everything she had done for Leonardo. She had become more than just a caretaker to him. She had become a part of their lives in a way he couldn't ignore. And so, they left the safety and warmth of the mansion behind, setting off into the unknown with a promise of redemption hanging in the air. Elena's nerves were frayed as they traveled. The uncertainty about what awaited them in the rundown neighborhood was suffocating, but there was also a strange sense of relief. Finally, after years of searching, she was close, closer than she had been in ages, to finding Gabriel. She hadn't seen him in nearly 5 years, and the memory of their last moments together was one she had pushed into the darkest corners of her mind. Would he even remember her? Would he want anything to do with her after all this time? The neighborhood they arrived at was a far cry from the mansion. Dilapidated buildings lined the narrow streets, and the air was thick with the scent of decay. It was a world far removed from the life Elena had come to know in Luca's home, and yet it was the world she had never truly left behind. As they drove past crumbling storefronts and broken streetlights, Elena's grip on her seat tightened. This place held so many ghosts, and now she was about to face them. Luca pulled the car to a stop in front of a small, run-down house at the end of a dead-end street. The house looked as if it had been abandoned for years, the windows boarded up and the paint peeling from the door. Elena's stomach churned. This was where Gabriel had ended up, a far cry from the young boy full of promise she remembered. They stepped out of the car, and Luca placed a reassuring hand on Elena's shoulder. "We're in this together," he said softly. Elena nodded but didn't speak. She couldn't. Her throat had closed up, and the weight of the past threatened to swallow her whole. They approached the front door, and Elena hesitated for a moment before knocking. The door creaked open, revealing a man who looked nothing like the boy she had known. Gabriel had changed. He was no longer the bright-eyed child she remembered. Instead, he was a hardened young man, his face shadowed with a bitterness that Elena recognized all too well. His eyes, once filled with hope, were now dull and guarded, as if the years had drained the life from him. "What do you want?" Gabriel's voice was sharp, and his posture stiffened as if he were ready to shut the door at any moment. Elena swallowed hard, the words struggling to form. "Gabriel, it's me. It's Elena." For a moment, Gabriel just stared at her, his expression unreadable. Then, without warning, he stepped back and motioned for them to come inside. As they entered, the weight of the years settled between them. The room was dimly lit, cluttered with old furniture, and the smell of neglect lingered in the air. Gabriel didn't offer them a seat, nor did he speak. He simply stood there, arms crossed, waiting for an explanation. Elena's voice trembled as she began to speak. "I've been looking for you. I never stopped searching. I couldn't find you after everything happened. I thought I lost you, and I've been trying to make up for that ever since. I'm so sorry, Gabriel. I'm sorry I couldn't protect you." Gabriel's eyes flickered with something, anger, confusion, or maybe a mix of both. He finally broke his silence. "You think you could just show up after all these years and apologize? You abandoned me, Elena. You left me behind." Elena's heart twisted with the harshness of his words. She hadn't been prepared for the rawness of his anger, but she understood it. How could she expect him to welcome her with open arms after all the time they had lost? "I never meant to abandon you," she whispered. "I was trying to survive just like you. I never stopped thinking about you, Gabriel. I swear, I'll try to find you every day." Gabriel's face softened for a moment, but then the anger flared again. "You don't know what I've been through. You don't know what it was like after you left." Luca watched quietly, giving them space to confront the past. It was clear that this reunion was far from a peaceful one, but he could see the pain in both of their eyes. This was more than just a family reunion. This was a reckoning, a long overdue confrontation of the years they had spent apart. Elena's voice shook as she continued. "I know. I don't know everything, but I know it was hard. And I want to help you now. I want us to be a family again. Please let me help you." Gabriel looked at her, his jaw clenched. He was fighting something, fighting the urge to break down or to walk away. But something in Elena's words seemed to reach him. Something in her eyes made him pause. He didn't answer right away, but after a long silence, he finally spoke. "Maybe you can, but it's going to take more than just words, Elena. It's going to take time, and I don't trust easily." The tension in the room eased slightly, though it was far from gone. For the first time, Elena felt a flicker of hope. Gabriel hadn't shut her out completely. There was a chance, and maybe, just maybe, they could rebuild the family they had once been. Back at the mansion, things were beginning to unravel. Elena's absence on this mission to find Gabriel had left the house in an uneasy state. The staff had been quietly whispering behind her back, and the strain between her and Adriana had only worsened. But the true danger lay within Marina, whose subtle manipulations were starting to reveal themselves. It was a late evening when the storm outside finally broke, and the oppressive air in the mansion seemed to dissipate. Luca had been in his study when he received a phone call. Marina had made a grave accusation. "She's stealing from you, Luca." Marina's voice was tight with fury. "Elena has been hiding things in the house. I've seen it. She's no better than the street rats she came from." Luca's eyes narrowed. He had long suspected Marina's animosity toward Elena, but this was something new, a deliberate attempt to tear Elena down, to ruin everything she had worked for in their home. He knew it was time to confront the situation head-on. That night, Luca decided to take action. He had already installed hidden cameras in the mansion, unsure of whom he could trust. And now, with Marina's accusations, it was time to review the footage. What he discovered was far more shocking than he had ever anticipated. Marina had been the one hiding things. She had been secretly taking items from the mansion and planting them in Elena's room, hoping to frame her for theft. The proof was undeniable. Marina was the real thief. In a swift decision, Lucas summoned Marina to his office. When she arrived, her face was flushed with the confidence of someone who thought they had already won. "You're fired," Lucas said flatly, without hesitation. "You've been manipulating me and everyone else in this house for far too long." Marina's face fell as the truth hit her. Her eyes darted around, but there was no escape. The evidence was clear. She was caught. "You can't do this," she spat, her voice shaking with anger. "You'll regret this." But Luca was resolute. "No, Marina. I've had enough of your lies." In the blink of an eye, Marina was escorted out of the mansion, and the once toxic atmosphere began to lift. But there was more to come. Elena's place in the family was far from secure, and the battle for trust was far from over. With Marina gone from the mansion, A new chapter of tension began to unfold, but the echoes of her betrayal were far from silenced. Despite her departure, she was not finished causing trouble for Elena. In a final act of vengeance, Marina took the accusations to the authorities, filing charges against Elena for theft. She claimed that Elena had stolen valuable items from the mansion and had been using the family's trust to manipulate her way into their lives. The accusations were severe and the stakes were high. The courtroom was filled with an air of uncertainty. Lucas stood by Elena's side, unwavering in his belief in her innocence. He had already uncovered the truth, having seen the hidden footage that exposed Marina's lies. Yet, the public nature of the trial, the very notion of Elena being accused of a crime she hadn't committed, was a new level of humiliation. As they entered the courtroom, Elena's nerves flared. She had never imagined herself in such a position, standing in front of a judge, trying to defend herself from something she had never done. Her heart pounded in her chest as she looked around, feeling exposed, vulnerable, and trapped by the weight of Marina's false accusations. But Lucas stood beside her, his presence a quiet strength. "We'll get through this," he whispered, his voice steady but filled with determination. The prosecutor presented Marina's version of events with meticulous precision, painting Elena as a schemer who had taken advantage of the family's goodwill. They played her supposed thefts, small yet significant, suggesting a pattern of deceit that had gone unnoticed until Marina bravely stepped forward to expose it. It seemed like an uphill battle, and the odds appeared stacked against them. But then, Lucas stepped forward, his calm demeanor commanding the room's attention. He presented his evidence, footage from the hidden cameras he had installed throughout the mansion, footage that proved Marina's betrayal. The room fell silent as Luca revealed the footage. Marina, in the act of placing stolen goods in Elena's room, her face filled with malice as she plotted to frame the girl she despised. It was an undeniable blow to Marina's case. The evidence was clear, and Luca's confidence was palpable. When it came time for Elena to testify, her voice was quiet but resolute. "I've done nothing but care for your son. I've given everything to help him," she said, her eyes meeting the judge's with a mixture of fear and strength. "I've tried to be part of this family, but I never stole from anyone. I would never do that." Luca's lawyer expertly dismantled Marina's claims, proving that she had orchestrated everything to destroy Elena's reputation. By the end of the trial, it was clear Elena was the victim here, not the villain. When the judge finally ruled in their favor, there was a collective sense of relief in the air. Elena was exonerated, and Marina was arrested for theft and conspiracy. The tension that had plagued the family for so long began to dissipate, leaving behind a feeling of hope. The truth had been revealed, and with it, Elena's place in the Savelli family was solidified. However, despite the victory, the emotional toll it had taken on everyone was immense. Luca and Elena stood side by side, their relationship stronger than ever, but both knew that the road ahead would require more than just legal victories. It would take trust, understanding, and time to heal the wounds that had been inflicted. The days following the court ruling were filled with mixed emotions. The family's sense of relief was palpable, but the scars left by the ordeal were still fresh. Yet, despite the darkness that had hovered over them, the Savelli family began to slowly rebuild, each day bringing them closer to a new beginning. Luca had never been more certain about his decisions. He had once believed that money, status, and control were the foundations of a successful life. But through everything that had unfolded, he had come to realize that the most valuable thing he could offer was trust. Trust in his family, trust in the people who had proven themselves worthy of his loyalty. Elena had shown him that there was more to life than the superficial things he had once prized. And now, with her by his side, Luca felt a sense of peace he hadn't known in years. Leonardo's progress was nothing short of miraculous. His anxiety had lessened, and he began to open up in ways he hadn't before. Elena had become not only a caregiver, but a true member of the family, a woman whose warmth and compassion had transformed the life of the young boy who had once been too frightened to even leave his room. The bond between them grew stronger with each passing day, and Leonardo's transformation was evident to everyone. As for Elena, she finally felt a sense of belonging that she had never known. She had once been an outsider, a girl with no place to call home. But now, she had found her place in the Savelli household, not as an employee, not as a temporary guest, but as someone who was loved and respected. Her relationship with Gabriel, though still rocky, had begun to show signs of improvement. He had moved into a small apartment nearby, and while they had much to work through, their connection had been renewed. The family began to heal. The mansion that had once felt so cold and unwelcoming became a place of warmth and hope. The rooms that had been filled with tension were now filled with laughter, and the atmosphere shifted from one of uncertainty to one of possibility. Luca, Elena, and Leonardo, along with Gabriel, who still had a long road ahead of him, found themselves living a life that was richer than any material wealth. The bond they shared, forged through hardship and strife, was unbreakable. And as for the Savelli family, they had learned that true wealth was not measured by money, but by the love, trust, and loyalty they shared. They had survived the storm, and now they were ready to build a new life, a life based on the values that truly mattered. Together, in the end, Elena and the Savelli family's journey reached a conclusion filled with hope and healing. The hardships and challenges they faced were not just a battle to protect the truth, but a journey of discovering the core values of life: love, trust, and loyalty. What had unfolded was not only a victory over darkness, but also a realization that family, though sometimes not defined from the start, could grow stronger when nurtured with sincerity and patience. Elena, once a girl living in isolation, had finally found a true family, not through charity or repayment, but through understanding and genuine affection. Luca, once a man who valued power and wealth above all else, had learned that true success did not come from controlling everything, but from offering trust and love. And Leonardo, once a fearful child, had grown into a more confident and self-assured young boy, thanks to Elena's devoted care. As for Gabriel, though the wounds of the past still lingered, they had at least been given the chance to start anew. Slowly, they were beginning to rebuild their relationship, and though it would take time, it was a chance to heal and restore what had been lost. The Savelli family, after all the turmoil, had found peace in each other's arms. They knew that the road ahead would still hold challenges, but they were ready to face them together. Because now, they were no longer strangers, but a true family. A family bound not by blood alone, but by love, trust, and shared experiences. Life went on, but one thing was certain: they would always stand by each other, never letting go. Thank you so much for joining me on this incredible journey and for staying with me until the very end of the story. Your support means the world, and I hope you found the story as meaningful and touching as I did. If you enjoyed this tale, please don't forget to like, comment, and share your thoughts below. It really helps a lot. If you want to see more stories like this, don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss an update. Your encouragement keeps me going, and I'm so excited to bring you more exciting content in the future. Once again, thank you for watching, and I can't wait to share more stories with you soon.